You're watching MHS. Sit back, sub, and enjoy scary stories.
The story began late one night on a quiet street near South Station in Boston. After her company party ended late, Mia decided to call a taxi to go home alone. Normally, she didn't drink alcohol, but tonight she was so happy about a big project win that she had a few drinks. Mia got into the taxi, feeling a little tipsy. She got in, tried to stay focused, and gave the address for her apartment complex in Cambridge. As the car started to move, the driver didn't leave right away. He hesitated and asked Mia if he could pick up one more passenger. Mia then noticed a woman standing near the driver's door, talking to him. The woman said she was also headed in the direction of Cambridge. Thinking that riding with another woman would be safer than being alone, Mia agreed. The woman happily thanked them. She immediately got into the car, introduced herself as Clara, and started chatting with Mia. Clara asked questions and then exclaimed in surprise that she also lived at 910 Memorial Drive. Clara chatted happily, saying it must be fate, and commented that the apartment complex they both lived in was an ideal place to live. "You're coming back from a company party, right? Did you drink a lot?" "Me too. I'm coming back from a party for a wine company. I had quite a bit to drink, being a wine company. Plus, I really like to drink." Mia nodded at Clara's story and didn't say anything more. She was trying very hard to fight off the dizziness. Usually when sharing a taxi, people stay quiet because they feel awkward, but Clara talked non-stop, maybe because she was drunk. "You drive so smoothly. Can I know your name?" After just a few seconds of silence, Clara started talking to the driver. He paused a moment, then introduced himself as Roy. But right at that moment, through the rearview mirror, Mia suddenly caught a glimpse of Roy's cold and stiff expression. A strange feeling suddenly appeared. She started watching Roy more closely, asking herself, "Am I the only one who thinks he's weird, or does Clara notice too?" Mia suddenly remembered a news report she'd recently watched. It was about a case where a taxi driver stopped at a gas station, went into the convenience store to buy a weapon, and then drove to a secluded spot and attacked a passenger. The case was shocking because the driver hadn't shown any unusual signs throughout his shift and had no clear motive. Fear crept in. Mia leaned slightly forward, intending to check the driver's picture and information. Just as Mia was about to look closely at the driver's picture and information, Clara suddenly turned her head and asked, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Seeing Mia jump slightly and look a bit uncomfortable, Clara quickly apologized for talking too much. "I've been a little inconsiderate, haven't I? I'll be quiet for a bit." She gave a small laugh, but her expression was now stiff and unnatural, which made Mia more confused than reassured. The atmosphere in the car became heavy and strange. Right then, Roy glanced at Clara through the rearview mirror, and Clara also looked back at Roy, as if they were exchanging a secret signal. A thought flashed through Mia's mind. She said the same address. That's too much of a coincidence. Did she know I would be catching a cab here? Or was this all staged from the beginning? And why does the driver have such a cold look in his eyes? He doesn't look like someone in the service industry. He looks like he's waiting for his chance. Mia suddenly recalled another detail from a different case. In that one, the rideshare passenger turned out to be the driver's accomplice. A sense of immediate danger surged through her. "Driver, please let me out at the rest stop up ahead. I'm not feeling well. I'll pay for the distance we've gone." Clara's voice was completely different now, as if she was signaling something. The driver didn't answer, only nodded as if he understood the information. The car stopped at a roadside rest area. Both Mia and the driver got out of the car at the same time. Mia watched Clara walk into the convenience store, while the driver told Mia to please wait a moment and headed toward the restroom. The rest stop was empty, making Mia feel even more frantic, and her heart began to pound. A strong urge told her not to stay. Mia suddenly saw another taxi parked on the side with its driver standing next to it. Without hesitation, Mia left the taxi fare money and quickly ran to the new taxi. She briefly told the new driver about the strange situation she had just experienced. The driver listened very closely with a serious expression, then nodded and said he would call the police right away. They both got into the car and quickly drove away. As the taxi started to leave, Mia looked back. The first driver was running after them, yelling something and looking angry. Mia gripped the armrest tightly, believing her intuition had been right. She had truly escaped something very dangerous. The next morning, the first news story on Boston's television channels reported on a shocking murder case. The victim was a young woman who took a taxi alone late at night. The cruel truth was slowly revealed as the police investigated. The first driver, named Roy, was just a new driver, stressed and nervous during his first night shift. The cold expression Mia saw in the rearview mirror was only due to his anxiety and lack of experience. Clara, the woman who rode with Mia, was simply a drunk, talkative girl. The fact that she also lived at 910 Memorial Drive was a real coincidence, not a conspiracy. The driver Mia thought was her savior was actually Franklin Hayes, a wanted criminal who was impersonating a taxi driver. In the restroom at the rest stop, Roy had recognized Frank from a wanted poster. He was trying to run after them, shouting to warn and save Mia. But Mia, fueled by fear, suspicion, and the alcohol, had misunderstood everything. She had put herself into the car of the real killer. This story leaves a painful lesson. If you are a woman taking a taxi alone, especially at night, always text or call someone you know before getting in. Let them know where you are going, the license plate number, and the driver's name. Stay in contact throughout the ride or share your live location through an app. Vigilance is necessary, but having precautionary measures prepared is the key to staying safe. Never let yourself become the person who disappears into the night without anyone knowing.
This is a true story from when I was 19 years old. I have an older sister named Rebecca who is 3 years older than me. We used to go to the AMC theater downtown all the time to catch movies. Even though we were very close, our tastes were completely different. My sister loved romantic comedies, while I was obsessed with action movies and horror films. Because of that, we usually picked different movies and just agreed to meet up afterward. It was a freezing weekend night in December, but we decided to go to an 11 p.m. showing anyway. As usual, we went into our separate theaters and planned to meet in the first floor lobby once our movies were over. My movie ended about 20 minutes early, so I headed down to the lobby to wait. The theater was almost empty at that hour. There were just a few employees scattered around cleaning up, and most of the other customers had already left. Before long, I was the only person left in the massive lobby. The setting was familiar, but it started to feel a bit eerie. The long rows of red velvet seats looked strange under the dim fluorescent lights. To be honest, I started to feel a little uneasy. It was probably a mix of the cold weather and the creepy scenes I had just watched in my movie. To calm my nerves, I put on my headphones and started scrolling through social media on my phone. After a while, my neck started to ache from looking down for so long. When I finally looked up, my heart jumped. There was a man sitting in the row of seats directly across from me, staring right at me. He looked to be about 30 years old and was wearing a dark jacket. He didn't blink. He just kept his eyes locked on me with a terrifying level of focus. At first, I tried to tell myself I was just being sensitive. I started to look back down at my phone, but my gut was screaming that something was wrong. I took a quick, secret glance back up, and he still hadn't moved his eyes. This wasn't just a stranger glancing at me in public. This was intentional. At that point, All my survival instincts kicked in. I decided to stand up, acting as calm as possible, and moved to a different seating area near the ticket counter where I saw an employee cleaning. I figured I would be safer where someone could see me. But the moment I sat down and pulled out my phone to text my sister, the elevator doors nearby opened with a soft ding. The same man stepped out. Once again, he sat down in a chair directly across from me. He sat in the exact same pose as before and began staring at me again. He didn't say a word. He didn't make a single gesture. His gaze and that heavy silence were suffocating. Every personal safety lesson I had ever learned in school started ringing in my head. My intuition told me I was in real danger. I turned around to ask for help, but the cleaning employee was gone. I hit a point of pure panic. It was just me and him in that lobby. Without hesitating, I bolted for the emergency exit. As soon as I pushed the door open and started running down the stairs, I heard the door slam behind me, followed by the sound of heavy, fast footsteps chasing after me. There was no doubt anymore. He was coming for me. My skin crawled, and cold sweat poured down my back. I ran blindly, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound of his footsteps echoed loudly in the enclosed space of the concrete stairwell. Finally, I reached the first-floor exit, shoved the door open, and burst out into the parking lot behind the theater. I didn't dare look back. I kept running toward the main street where the streetlights were bright and there were cars driving by. Luckily, there was a 7-Eleven right next to the theater. I dashed inside like I had found a literal life raft. The guy working the counter looked at me, totally startled. He asked if I was okay, but I couldn't even speak. I was gasping for air, and I immediately turned around to look out the glass front doors. Thank God I didn't see anyone on the sidewalk outside. There were just a few cars passing by. I started to breathe a sigh of relief, thinking I had finally lost him. But just as I was about to explain everything to the clerk, I froze in total shock. I caught a movement outside, at the far right corner of the store. I looked closer and saw the man. He was standing right against the outside window, half of his body hidden in the shadows of the alleyway. Only half of his face was visible. His eyes were still burning into me, unblinking and completely emotionless. I let out a sharp scream and backed away, my hands and legs shaking uncontrollably. The clerk ran over and looked where I was pointing, but in a split second, the man vanished into the darkness. "Is someone out there?" the clerk asked. "A man." "He's stalking me," I managed to choke out. The kind clerk immediately locked the front door and told me to call my family. I called my sister immediately. She said she was just about to call me because she couldn't find me in the lobby. After she heard what happened, she rushed over to the 7-Eleven to find me. When I saw her, I broke down in tears. My body wouldn't stop shaking. The store clerk helped us call the police. The police arrived quickly with 3 officers. 2 of them spread out to search the alleys in the parking lot, while the third took my statement. I tried to give every detail I could remember. They also went into the theater to check the security cameras. However, the hope of identifying him faded fast. The officer came back after checking the footage and shook his head. "He was smart," the officer said. "He always kept his face down or stood in blind spots where the cameras couldn't get a clear shot. Even in the elevator, he stood with his back to the lens." They checked the files of known offenders in the area, but no one matched my description perfectly. With no fingerprints and no clear photo, the man was like a ghost who appeared just to terrorize me and then dissolved back into nothing. The police told us it would be nearly impossible to find him without more evidence. It has been many years since that terrifying night. My sister and I never go to late-night movie showings anymore. To this day, I still don't know who that man was or what he wanted. I just feel lucky that I stayed alert and ran when I had the chance. If I had waited even a few seconds longer, something horrible might have happened to me. My name is Martin, and I'm 34 years old. I've been a delivery driver for 1-800-Flowers for over 6 years. To most people, February 14th is a day for romance. For those of us in the delivery business, it's the Super Bowl of total chaos. Everything started at 4 a.m. on a cold, damp Valentine's Day last year. From the very beginning, the universe seemed to be against me. The office printer broke down completely, which meant we didn't have organized route manifests. Instead of a neat list sorted by GPS, we were handed a messy stack of invoices. To make things worse, the truck they gave me was an old clunker I called the Rust Bucket. The engine rattled, and the back door was a nightmare to open and close. I wanted to finish early so I could get home for dinner with my wife, so I rushed out to start my deliveries without waiting for the official route list. I figured my years of experience would be enough to wing it. 2 hours later, I had delivered quite a few gifts and felt like I was making great progress. But then, a major mistake happened. I delivered a bouquet of roses to an address that turned out to be a customer's old apartment. The guy who ordered the flowers had forgotten to update his address in the system. Instead of going to his current girlfriend, the flowers ended up with his ex. As I was continuing my route, my phone rang. My manager explained the situation. The customer had called to complain that his ex-girlfriend went ballistic after receiving the flowers. He was furious and demanded the company fix it immediately. The company told me I had to go back, retrieve the flowers, and deliver them to the correct address. I sighed. It wasn't even my fault. But since I work in service, I had no choice but to go back. When I rang the doorbell at that apartment, the silence was eerie. After the fourth ring, a raspy, suspicious female voice came through the intercom. "Who is it?" "Hi, I'm the driver from 1-800-Flowers. I'm here to pick up the bouquet that was delivered to the wrong address by mistake." There was a long pause. Then she screamed through the speaker, her voice ear-piercing. "I threw that trash away the second I saw his name on the card. Stop bothering me." After 10 minutes of using my most patient customer service voice, she finally opened the door. She wore heavy, smeared makeup and had dark circles under her eyes, looking like she hadn't slept in days. She wasn't screaming anymore. Instead, her voice turned weirdly flirtatious. "You're a handsome guy," she said, twirling a lock of her hair. "Why is a hardworking man like you picking up trash for a guy like him?" I gave a forced smile and tried to stay professional. But when I reached up to adjust my hat, the hallway light caught the wedding ring on my finger. Her eyes changed instantly. The flirtatiousness vanished, replaced by cold, pure hatred. She gritted her teeth and muttered, "Another cheater. You're all the same." She led me to the back of the building and pointed at an industrial dumpster. "It's in there." I looked into the bin. It was almost chest-high and filled with trash, luckily mostly just scrap paper. I hesitated, but I just wanted to get this over with. I climbed onto the edge of the dumpster and leaned inside to find the roses. Suddenly, I heard a loud noise right behind me. A split second later, a heavy blow slammed into the back of my head. The impact was so hard I saw stars. I lost my balance and tumbled face first into the trash. "You piece of trash, men. This is the price for betrayal," she screamed from outside. Then I heard a heavy bang. The metal lid slammed shut. I heard the sound of her dragging something very heavy on top of the lid to weight it down. I tried to stand up and push the lid, but it wouldn't budge. I yelled for her to let me out, but she just kept cursing at me until everything suddenly went silent. The feeling was horrifying. It was dark and suffocating. I have claustrophobia, and it started to trigger a massive panic attack. My heart was racing, and my breath became shallow. I shoved the lid with everything I had, but it didn't move an inch. My limbs started shaking uncontrollably. I was too panicked to think logically. I was convinced I was going to die in there. I fumbled through my jacket pockets, found my phone, and called my wife. "Honey, listen to me. I'm inside a dumpster," I whispered, my voice breaking from fear and lack of oxygen. I told her I loved her, speaking as if it were the last time. My wife, who is a nurse, stayed incredibly calm. She tracked my phone's location and called the local fire department immediately. About 10 minutes later, my wife and the firefighters arrived. Bright light flooded in as they forced the lid open. Strong hands pulled me out of the trash. The police were also on the scene. They went up to the apartment and arrested the woman. She was acting completely manic, screaming things that made no sense. When she saw me, she tried to lunge at me, forcing the police to use a taser to restrain her before taking her away. I was checked out by the paramedics on site. The bump on my head wasn't too serious. I ended my shift and went home with my wife. The company called to check on me, and I took a few days off. I received a decent settlement to compensate for what I went through. That night, even though it was much later than planned, I finally had that warm dinner with my wife. Even though it's over, that remains the most terrifying memory of my delivery career. Now, I always double-check every address. I never rush, and I absolutely never climb into a dumpster for any reason whatsoever. My name is Nathan. I'm 28 years old, and I live in Boston. The story I'm about to tell isn't just a scary encounter with betrayal or violence. It's a nightmare that reached down into the deepest, most painful parts of my family history. I am a third-generation Jewish American. Everything happened last year during my birthday month. I decided to take a solo trip to Portland, Oregon, just to find a little bit of freedom. Portland welcomed me with its signature drizzle and its laid-back, artsy vibe. That night, I was wandering around downtown and stopped into a bar. Amidst the loud crowd, my eyes were immediately drawn to a girl with a striking pink pixie cut dancing by herself to the music. She was wearing a tight black dress that showed off every curve. Even though she was only about 5 feet tall, she had this perfect mix of cute and sexy that I couldn't stop staring at. I didn't even need to work up the courage to talk to her. She was the one who approached me. She introduced herself as Katie. We found a quieter corner at the bar and started talking. The glasses of whiskey and cocktails kept coming. We laughed, flirted, and the space between us kept getting smaller. Under the dim lights, we danced and kissed. Then Katie whispered, "Want to come back to my place?" I nodded without a second thought, feeling like the luckiest guy in the world. Her apartment was in an old building on the edge of downtown, tucked away in a neighborhood of narrow, deep alleys. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache. My body felt heavy, and my mouth was bone dry. I slowly opened my eyes and realized I was alone. Katie was nowhere to be found. As I lay there in a daze, I suddenly heard the jingle of keys. Then, a man's deep, gravelly voice echoed from the hallway. "Katie, where the hell are you?" I bolted upright, instantly awake. I scrambled out of bed and started frantically looking for my clothes scattered across the floor. I didn't have time to wonder if this was her husband, her boyfriend, or someone else. I just knew I had to disappear. I grabbed my clothes, shaking as I pulled on my pants, and dove into the walk-in closet right next to the bed. I pulled the wooden door almost shut, trying to keep my breathing as silent as possible. Through the narrow crack in the closet door, I watched a giant of a man walk into the bedroom. He had to be at least 6 feet 4 inches, with massive muscles bulging under a black tank top and thick tattoos covering both arms. He grumbled a curse, tossed a bag onto the bed, and started looking around. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I backed deeper into the shadows of the closet to stay out of his line of sight, my hand brushed against some stiff, rough fabric. I glanced to my side. Hanging right next to me were old military uniforms with strange patches. My heart stopped when I saw a bright red armchair with a white circle and a black swastika in the center. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I realized I wasn't just hiding in the home of a violent man. I was in the home of a neo-Nazi. My terror reached a breaking point when I instinctively reached for my neck and realized my necklace was gone. It was a simple silver chain with the Star of David, a family heirloom that my great-grandfather managed to keep while surviving the Buchenwald concentration camp. I suddenly remembered taking it off and putting it on the nightstand before I went to sleep. If that man found it, he would tear this entire room apart to find me. He was still standing in the middle of the room, sniffing the air like a predator. His instincts seemed to be telling him something was wrong. He stared toward the closet, and I bit my lip so hard it bled. Cold sweat poured down my spine as I prayed for my great-grandfather's spirit to protect me. Finally, he muttered a few more curses and walked out of the bedroom. I heard his heavy footsteps fading away. This was my only chance. I lunged out of the closet and grabbed the necklace. "Is someone in the bedroom?" His voice suddenly boomed, full of threat. I panicked. I had to get out, now. I ran to the window and looked down. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, at least 30 feet up. My stomach churned with vertigo. My lifelong fear of heights came rushing back. But behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps charging toward the door. "Where are you hiding that piece of trash?" he roared in anger. I didn't have another second to hesitate. I grabbed the windowsill, took a deep breath, and threw myself out. Time seemed to slow down. My body hung in the air, and the feeling of weightlessness made my stomach flip. The wind whistled in my ears. I saw the ground rushing up to meet me at a terrifying speed. To my surprise, the impact wasn't as painful as I expected. I opened my eyes and realized I had landed in a massive pile of trash bags behind the building. The stench was overwhelming, but to me, it was the smell of being alive. I felt a few cuts from broken glass and bruises forming all over my body, but I could still move. I looked up and gasped when I saw the man's face leaning out of the window. His eyes were wide with rage. "Stay right there, you bastard," he screamed. I scrambled to my feet and ran out of the alley at full speed. I didn't dare look back even once. It wasn't until hours later, when I was safely on a train leaving the city, that I finally started to shake. I looked down at the necklace in my hand and thought about my great-grandfather, and then I thought about Katie. Who was she? Was she a honeypot, intentionally leading men like me into a trap? Or was she just another victim of that man? I'll never know. Since that day, I never underestimate a chance encounter again. I'm always on the lookout for red flags, and I check twice for the things I don't know.
My name is Francis. When this happened, I was about 10 years old. My family lived in Chicago at the time. Our house sat at the end of a U-shaped street, and the neighbors' houses were spaced pretty far apart. Because of my parents' work schedules, I was often home alone after school. At first, I really enjoyed the freedom. I usually spent my time playing games online or watching TV to pass the time. Sometimes I did my homework, but most of the time, I was glued to the computer screen. It was a cold winter afternoon, and I had been let out of school early. After getting off the bus at the end of the block, I walked home like usual. As soon as I walked through the door, I tossed my backpack on the floor and went straight to my dad's office. I turned on the computer and started gaming, completely losing myself in the virtual world. After playing for about 30 minutes, I suddenly heard a very faint meowing sound coming from outside the window. I figured it was the neighbor's cat that always came over to play in our backyard. But I didn't like cats at all. When I was 7, a stray cat had scratched my arm so deeply that I still have the scar today. Since then, I've always made an effort to stay away from them. I kept playing my game. However, a few minutes later, the meowing started again. The sound was still quiet, but it was persistent. I stood up and looked out the window into the backyard, but I didn't see anything. It kept happening over and over. Every time I tried to focus on my game, the meowing would start up again, steady and haunting. After 10 minutes of this, I started to get annoyed. I thought the cat might be hiding somewhere, playing games with me. I sighed, turned off the computer, and went to the living room to watch TV. I had only been sitting there for a few minutes when I heard the sound again. It was right behind me. It was coming from right outside the living room window. I jerked my head around and stared through the glass, but I still saw nothing. No sign of a cat anywhere. A strange feeling started to crawl over me, and I felt a shiver down my spine. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door tight. I pulled the curtains shut over every window, turned on all the lights, and buried my head in a pile of comic books on my bed. I hoped I was just being paranoid. And then, the meow happened again, right outside my bedroom window. This time, my heart started racing. How was this cat following me? No matter where I moved in the house, it would show up there a few minutes later. I dashed to the landline in the living room and frantically dialed my dad's number. With a shaky voice, I told him that the neighbor's cat might be hurt because it was crying a lot, but I couldn't see it anywhere. The other end of the line went silent for a few seconds. My dad told me to check every lock on the doors immediately, stay inside, and said he was coming home right away. In the meantime, he said he would call Mr. Peter, our neighbor, to come over and check on things. Those 15 minutes of waiting felt like a century. I sat huddled on my bed, listening closely. The meowing kept drifting in, sometimes close and sometimes far away, until a loud noise thudded at the front of the house. Then, everything went dead silent. By the time my dad got home, the meowing had completely vanished. He searched the whole house thoroughly and gave me a very tight hug. That night, no one talked about what happened, but I noticed my dad's eyes looked different. He looked worried and tense. A few days later, once I had calmed down, my parents finally told me the truth about that day. When Mr. Peter had come over to check the house, he found large human footprints in the snow all around our home. They were pressed right up against the walls, in the blind spots where I couldn't see out the windows. It meant that even when I looked out, I couldn't see the person because he was hugging the wall. That stranger had moved from window to window, tracking me to see which room I was in. He was faking the cat noises to lure me outside. He likely knew I was home alone because he had been watching me, learning my routine, and waiting for the right moment. The footprints eventually led into the woods behind the house and disappeared into the thick brush. Other than that, there were no clues. No one saw him, and we didn't have any cameras to give the police evidence. After that day, my family installed a massive security system with cameras and motion sensors. My parents never left me home alone again until I was much older. Now, whenever I look at that cat scratch scar on my arm from when I was 7, I don't hate it anymore. In fact, I'm thankful for it. If it weren't for that scar, if I hadn't grown up with a fear and dislike of cats, I probably would have opened the door that afternoon out of curiosity. And if I had opened that door, I might not be here to tell this story today.
My name is Cameron. This story happened 4 years ago, right when I was a wide-eyed freshman starting out at Cal State Northridge. That was the year I met Josh Bennett. The semester had been going for about a month when Josh first showed up. He walked into the lecture hall radiating confidence. The first thing I noticed was how handsome he was. He had a great physique and a bright, winning smile. Honestly, half the students in the class were checking him out. I was secretly thrilled when Josh chose to sit at my table. We quickly became study partners. Josh was smart, polite, and always had these sharp, deep insights into social issues. I'll admit I was totally charmed by his looks and his vibe. I even started daydreaming about us becoming more than just friends. But there was one thing about Josh that bothered me. Even though he looked like $1,000,000, he always gave off a very strange, unpleasant smell that I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't the typical body odor of an active guy. Some days, it was a faint, metallic scent, like a handful of old copper pennies. On hot days, it got much stronger. I tried to tell myself he just had a skin condition, or maybe wore a really weird cologne. I planned to bring it up gently once we got closer, but that chance came in the most terrifying way possible. One late afternoon, Josh invited me over to his off-campus apartment. I eagerly agreed, thinking this was a big step forward in our relationship. The moment I stepped inside, my nose was hit by a sharp, overwhelming chemical smell. It smelled like a professional lab or a sterile hospital wing. I tried to act natural, not wanting to seem rude while he was being such a good host. Suddenly, Josh grabbed my hand to lead me deeper into the apartment. My heart started racing, but a second later, I felt a shiver of dread. Josh's hand was freezing cold and felt strangely damp and sticky, like he had just been soaking his hands in ice water. As I walked close to him, I smelled that metallic stench again, mixed with the sterile scent of bleach. It smelled like decaying meat hidden under a layer of cleaning supplies. The combination made my stomach turn. I'm a pretty neat person, so I couldn't hold it back anymore. "Josh, do you smell something weird in here? Is there a problem with the pipes or something?" I asked, trying to be as polite as possible. His reaction was totally unexpected. Josh stayed silent for a few seconds, then let out a soft laugh. He walked over to a drawer next to the TV and pulled out a small tube. He opened it and, without warning, smeared a glob of ointment directly onto the skin under my nose. The intense scent of menthol shot up my nostrils, making me flinch. "This helps," Josh said with a creepy smile. He stared directly into my eyes with a look of pure amusement. "You'll get used to it. Eventually, you'll start smelling it on your own body, too." His words left me completely confused and unsettled. But before I could ask what he meant, he laughed loudly. "Come on, let me show you the rest of the place. I have some cool things to show you." Even though I was feeling incredibly uncomfortable, I followed him. He led me through several dark rooms and eventually to the back of the house. I was surprised to see a massive swimming pool, but the water was pitch black. It looked deep and murky, like a bottomless pit or an industrial vat. "This is the most special part of the house," he exclaimed. While I was standing right at the edge looking down, Josh suddenly lunged toward me. He made a violent motion as if he was going to shove me into the black water. By reflex, I jumped back so fast I almost fell over. "Just kidding," Josh laughed loudly, but his eyes weren't laughing at all. They were cold. I felt sick. I didn't laugh, and I couldn't even look him in the eye anymore. I made up a lame excuse about a project I forgot to finish and sprinted out of the house. I didn't look back, but I knew he was standing there, watching me leave with that mysterious smile. A few days later, Josh vanished. He stopped coming to class and wouldn't answer his phone. An unexplainable sense of dread forced me to drive back to his apartment to check on him. The scene I arrived at left me paralyzed. The house was taped off by the FBI. Police and forensics teams were everywhere. The news broke on local sites shortly after, and it was more horrific than any scary movie I'd ever seen. The police had been tracking a missing student, and it led them to Josh's place. In the basement, they found a literal warehouse of horrors. They found the body of a young woman perfectly mummified, preserved in a custom casket with an industrial cooling system. But that was just the beginning. The FBI uncovered a dark network behind Josh. He wasn't a normal student at all. Josh was a body broker on the dark web. Josh Bennett, my handsome deskmate, was actually selling human remains online. He wasn't just a killer, he was a self-taught embalmer who preserved bodies to sell to sick buyers overseas. Police found hundreds of encrypted messages and bank transfers totaling tens of thousands of dollars. He had been planning to flee the country right before he was caught. In that moment, I remembered his joke at the pool. I am now certain it wasn't a joke at all. Josh was going to kill me. His weird comment about smelling it on my own body was a dark warning. I was his next target. If I hadn't left the apartment that day, I would have ended up as one of the preserved items in that basement. It's been 4 years. Josh is in prison, but I've never truly escaped the trauma. Sometimes, I still think I can smell that mix of menthol and bleach lingering in the air. It's terrifying to realize that I actually had feelings for a monster. I almost let a serial killer into my life. My name is Fiona. The story I'm about to tell you happened over 20 years ago, but every single detail is burned into my mind as if it just happened yesterday. Back then, I was in my early 20s, young, full of energy, and incredibly naive. One day, I was driving to visit a close friend in the next state over. Because of my work schedule, I had to drive at night. I started my 4-hour journey around 7 p.m. The streetlights on the lonely highway flickered past. The car radio played soft music, and I hummed along to the familiar tunes. Around 9 p.m., while driving through a stretch of road with very little traffic, I saw a man standing on the shoulder. He was waving his hand, signaling for a ride. My headlights hit his thin frame. He was wearing ordinary clothes and didn't have any large luggage. I hesitated for a second, thinking about how hard it must be to be stranded on a dark road at night. Being a kind-hearted person by nature, I hit the brakes. I rolled down the window. The man looked to be in his 30s. He had a gaunt face and scruffy stubble. He looked at me with an expression that was almost shy. After a few questions, I learned he wanted a ride to the next city. Looking at him, I felt sorry for him. I agreed to give him a lift. He thanked me politely and climbed into the passenger seat. At first, the atmosphere in the car was a bit awkward. To break the silence, I started a conversation. Eventually, we both relaxed. The man told me he was going through a hard time because he had just gone bankrupt and was trying to start over. His voice was calm, like he had become numb to his misfortunes. When I asked about his family, his answers were vague. I figured he didn't want to share much, so I stopped asking. About an hour later, we pulled into a large rest stop. I was really hungry and figured my passenger was too. I invited him to have dinner. When I said I would pay, he paused for a moment. A look of confusion or embarrassment crossed his thin face. During dinner, we continued to chat. He talked about his hometown and his struggles. I listened and offered some words of encouragement. I felt a strange sense of connection with this stranger sitting across from me. After the meal, we got back on the road. The vibe in the car was much friendlier now. However, I noticed he didn't initiate conversation much anymore. He only answered my questions. Every now and then, he would fall into a deep, silent thought. Around 10 p.m., when we reached the city center, I pulled over at the spot he requested. The man opened the door, but before getting out, he turned to look at me with eyes full of gratitude. "You are so kind. Thank you so much. I'm glad I got to meet you. Good luck with everything," I replied. He hesitated for a moment and then asked, "Could I get your name and phone number? I'd like to find a way to thank you properly later." In that moment, I realized we had forgotten to even exchange names. I didn't think much of it. I was happy to help and gave him my number. I genuinely liked him and thought it would be nice to have a new friend. He nodded and thanked me again. When I asked for his name in return, he hurried away very quickly. I wasn't sure if he didn't hear me or if he was just in a rush. I watched him disappear into the shadows and then continued driving to my friend's house. One evening later on, while I was sitting at home watching TV, my phone rang. An unknown number appeared on the screen. I picked up, and on the other end was a voice that sounded both familiar and strange. He started talking immediately, not giving me a chance to say a word. I don't know how to tell you this." I stayed silent, a cold feeling of unease creeping into my chest. The next words out of his mouth made my blood turn to ice. "You should thank God that you were raised to be such a decent person." That night, I didn't hitch a ride because I was bankrupt. I stood on that road with a detailed plan in my head. I was going to kill you, dump your body in a ditch along the highway, and steal your car. I needed money. I needed a way to get away, and I chose you the moment your headlights hit me. I felt my legs give out. I almost dropped the phone. He continued, his voice cracking. "I was waiting for the moment you stopped at the rest area to do it. I planned to do it right there in the car, but then you invited me to dinner. You looked at me and smiled at me like I was a real human being, not a piece of trash. You were the only person in years who asked if I was tired or if I was hungry. That warmth, it was like a slap in the face. I realized I couldn't kill a woman who treated me like a friend. He went silent for a second, then he practically roared into the phone, a plea that sounded like a scream. "Please, Fiona, please don't ever pick up another stranger. Not everyone in this world is going to stop because of a dinner like I did. Don't let your kindness be the death of you." Before I could say anything, the line went dead. He had hung up. I tried calling back immediately, but I couldn't get through. I eventually traced the number and found out it came from a public payphone. I was completely shell-shocked. My emotions were a mess of terror and confusion. I had narrowly escaped death. I was horrified by his intentions, but I was also curious about who he really was. Sometimes, I still wonder where that man is today and what he's doing. Since that night, I have never driven alone at night again. It's not just because I'm following his advice. It's because I'm afraid my heart won't listen to my head, and I'll let another stranger into my car. My name is Jenna. This is the story of the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me. I grew up in Naperville, a suburb of Chicago, back in the 80s. You have to understand how different things were then to really get this story. It was a time when people felt much safer than they do now. We grew up in a world where doors stayed unlocked, kids played outside until the streetlights came on, and helping a stranger was just what you did. Kindness was the common language, and I truly believe that almost everyone was fundamentally good. But something happened when I was 22 that changed my mind forever. It was a freezing winter day in Chicago. The temperature was well below zero, the wind was howling, and a light snow was covering the roads in white. I had just finished grocery shopping at a store near my house. As I was pushing my cart out to the parking lot, I heard a shaky voice behind me. "Miss, excuse me, could you wait a second?" I turned around. Standing there was a tiny, elderly woman. She had white hair peeking out from under a thick knit hat. She was wrapped tightly in a scarf, showing only her tired eyes and wrinkled skin. She was shivering from the cold and clutching an old handbag against her chest. She asked if I could give her a ride home. At first, I felt a little bit of doubt. I asked her why she didn't just call her family to pick her up. She explained that her daughter was busy at work and that her house was only a few blocks away. She said she had walked to the store to get a few things, but now the cold was too much for her and her legs were too weak to walk back. Seeing her standing there in the bitter cold, I couldn't say no. I decided to help her. I opened my trunk and started loading my groceries. While I was busy arranging the bags, the woman opened the back door and climbed into the back seat on her own. I was a little surprised, but I figured she was just too cold to wait outside. I thought maybe old people just preferred the extra space in the back, so I didn't think much of it. I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and turned the heater up to the max. The car started to warm up. I asked her where she lived, and she told me to drive straight and then take a right. I drove exactly where she told me. But as we kept driving without reaching a clear destination, I started to get confused. We had been driving for almost 20 minutes. We had gone much further than the few blocks she had mentioned. I asked her for the address again, and she insisted we were almost there, telling me to turn left at the next intersection. Then she told me to turn right, then go straight. I started to get a very bad feeling in my gut. We reached a busy intersection, and the light turned red. As I sat there waiting, I felt a powerful wave of anxiety hit me. I glanced up at the rearview mirror to check on her. My heart stopped. The person in the back had removed the scarf and the knit hat. Underneath, it wasn't the wrinkled face of an old lady. It was a man, a gaunt, thin man with a bony face, scruffy stubble, and cold, dead eyes staring directly at the back of my neck. The messy white wig he had been wearing was pushed to the side. I gripped the steering wheel in a panic, my whole body going stiff. I realized I had fallen right into his trap. Terror washed over me, but my survival instinct kicked in even harder. I couldn't let him take control of the situation. I had to get out, right now. I slammed the gear shift into park, unbuckled my seatbelt, and bolted out of the driver's side door right in the middle of the busy intersection. Horns started blaring behind me, but I didn't care. I ran around to the back and yanked the rear door open with all the strength of someone fighting for their life. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Get out of my car right now!" The man just looked at me. He didn't look scared or surprised. His eyes were empty and soulless. He quietly and slowly crawled out of the car. His movements were so calm, as if he were just finishing a normal daily chore. He stood up in the middle of the traffic, straightened his coat, and casually walked away into the crowd on the sidewalk. He disappeared as if nothing had happened. I stood there shaking uncontrollably, partly from the cold and partly from pure terror. For days afterward, I couldn't get the image out of my head. The memory of his cold face haunted me. I asked myself 1,000 times, what if I hadn't stopped at that red light? What if I had kept driving onto a deserted street like he told me to? What would have happened if I hadn't looked in the mirror? That day taught me a painful lesson. The world I grew up in, where people trusted and helped each other, had changed. Or maybe it was never as safe as I thought, and I had just been lucky. Since then, I never give rides to strangers. I've made it a habit to stay extremely alert to everything around me. It's not that I've become heartless or selfish. I just learned that kindness needs to be paired with caution. I still help people, but I do it in safer ways. I'll call a taxi for them, call the police, or contact a charity. But I will never let a stranger into my car ever again. My name is Bethany, and I'm 29 years old. On the top of my head, slightly to the right, I have a small scar about the size of my pinky fingertip. Nobody ever notices it except me. Every time I wash my hair or brush it, my fingers accidentally touch that little bump of skin. When they do, the memory of a late autumn afternoon when I was 14 years old comes back vividly, as if it happened only yesterday. That year, my family moved to a small town in the Northeast. It was the kind of place people jokingly called a redneck town. I didn't have any friends yet, I didn't know the streets, and I didn't understand how the local life worked. After school, I would usually walk to a park a few blocks from my house to kill time. I'd sit there alone, wearing my headphones and watching people pass by, sometimes missing my old life and my old house. That afternoon, I left the park just as it was starting to get dark. Autumn in the Northeast is tricky. The sun sets very fast. I wasn't in a hurry because I knew if I just followed this road past the fire station on the right, I'd be home in a few minutes. I started walking home. After a while, I heard an engine behind me, but I didn't think much of it. But after a few more minutes, the sound of the engine didn't pass me, and it didn't fall behind. It stayed at a steady pace right behind my back. I turned my head to look. A red Toyota truck was crawling slowly along the curb. The driver's side window was rolled down halfway. "Hey kid, get in. It's getting dark." A man's raspy voice called out from inside the truck. He looked about 50 years old, with small eyes that crinkled as if he were smiling. But that smile gave me the creeps. "No thank you," I replied. I tried to keep my voice steady, looked away, and kept walking. "Don't be shy. Where do you live? It's dangerous to walk alone," he insisted, not giving up. "I'm fine, thanks." I refused again and sped up. My heart started pounding against my ribs. I tried to tell myself that maybe he was just trying to be a nice guy. After a few seconds, I heard the sound of tires rolling softly on the pavement. I thought maybe he had finally driven away. But a second later, I heard a car door fly open and then slam shut. I turned around in shock. The truck had pulled over diagonally onto the curb. The man had jumped out and was walking fast toward me. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was tight and his eyes showed clear anger. I immediately started to run, but the distance was too short. I had barely gained any speed before a rough hand grabbed my arm from behind with a crushing grip. "Don't make this difficult," he growled. I screamed, but his other hand slammed over my mouth, cutting me off. I fought with everything I had. I bit his hand, I clawed at him, and I kicked wildly. I tried to break free, but he was way too strong. He dragged me backward toward the truck, and my feet skidded on the asphalt. I tried to grab the truck door to keep myself out, but he shoved me hard. My head hit the metal edge of the door with a loud thud. My ears started ringing, and my brain felt like it was buzzing. I lost my ability to fight back for a moment, and my knees buckled. He was trying to shove me into the seat. I could feel the edge of the upholstery touching my legs. I was still conscious enough to know one thing for sure. If I got into that truck, I was never going back home. I tried to cling to the door frame, but my strength was fading fast. My head throbbed, and my limbs felt heavy and lost. I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. And then, a sound erupted. It wasn't a car, and it wasn't a person. It exploded suddenly from the right side of the road, coming from the fire station just a few yards away. It was a long shriek so loud it felt like it was tearing my eardrums apart. The sound didn't just vibrate in the air, it hit me right in the chest, making my teeth rattle in my head. I had never heard anything like it in my life. It made me freeze in place. But the man's reaction was even more intense. He let go of me instantly. He took a step back, his eyes wide and his face turning pale. A curse word flew out of his mouth, barely audible over the deafening siren. I didn't stop to think. My body acted on instinct. I spun around and ran at full speed toward the nearest house. "Please, open the door!" I tried to scream, but my throat felt bone dry. The front door swung open. A man looked at me for a few seconds in total shock before quickly pulling me inside. "Calm down, you're safe now," he reassured me. He grabbed his phone and called 911 immediately. I slumped down onto the kitchen floor, my whole body shaking violently. The siren outside continued to wail for a few more seconds before it finally cut off, leaving behind a heavy, ringing silence. By the time the police and the ambulance arrived, the red truck was gone. I was put into the back of the ambulance. The paramedics checked my head, cleaned off the blood, and gave me a few stitches. The cut wasn't very deep, but it had bled enough to make my hair a matted mess. I sat there with my hands on my thighs, unable to stop trembling. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. The police asked for my statement and came to a simple conclusion. The guy wasn't from around here. Everyone in town had grown up hearing that siren. They knew it was just the alarm for the volunteer fire department. The fact that he reacted with such terror meant he had never heard it before. I hadn't either. I didn't know yet that this town had something very specific, a massive air raid style siren for the firehouse. It wasn't like a normal ambulance siren. It was mounted on a tall pole near the station, and whenever there was a fire or an emergency, it would let out a terrifying, long blast. The locals were used to it, but to a stranger, it sounded like the end of the world. Because of that horrible noise, I was saved. Many years have passed, and that man was never caught. I grew up, moved away from that town, and now I have a good life. But every time I think back, I feel grateful for that one random moment. If that fire hadn't started at that exact time, or if the siren hadn't gone off right at that second, my story would have had a much darker ending.
I'm Katie, and I've been a bank teller for 8 years. I've handled many situations, from angry customers to identity fraudsters. But there's one winter afternoon a few years ago that I've never forgotten. Now, every time I hear the beep from the ATM in the lobby, I still involuntarily shiver. It was a weekday around 12 p.m., a time we jokingly called dead time. Transactions were almost non-existent, and customers were sparse. I was standing at my counter when a middle-aged man walked in. He was wearing a Taco Bell delivery uniform and carrying a paper bag. He approached my counter, said nothing, and simply handed me a piece of paper. The content on it made my blood run cold. I have a bomb. I want $250,000 in 15 minutes if you want to live. Follow the steps, otherwise I will detonate it now. I looked up. Around his neck was a heavy black box-shaped device with wires and blinking red lights. He wasn't yelling or aggressive. On the contrary, he was incredibly calm. So calm that while waiting for me to process the transaction, he reached out and took a lollipop from the customer waiting jar. I honestly thought it was just a scare tactic. The thing he was wearing around his neck was a fake device. Some guy with mental issues or overwhelming debt. But what if it wasn't fake? I followed the emergency procedure exactly. The vault was locked by time delay then, so I could only give him a little over $8,000 in cash from my drawer. He took the money, said nothing else, and left calmly. Before he could exit the bank, the police swarmed in. I later learned they had received a call from a customer who had secretly slipped out to report the situation. Everything proceeded slowly and under control. They asked everyone to evacuate the bank silently. My colleagues, customers, and I were all evacuated, leaving only the robber trapped inside, along with 2 officers keeping watch from a corner of the room. His hands were cuffed and locked to a fixed waiting chair in the lobby. The bomb squad was on the way. I and a few colleagues hadn't left the area entirely. We stayed outside to monitor the situation. I could see him through the bank's glass windows. He still had that calm demeanor. He even leaned his head against the wall, as if taking a nap. I saw an officer standing near him say something, but he just shrugged and nodded in a kind of defiant way. What makes a person with a bomb strapped to them so calm? But a few minutes later, I saw him start to change. His eyes darted around constantly. His eyes widened in disbelief. Then he started to scream. The police quickly withdrew from the building, leaving him alone in the room. I stood frozen outside the door. Through the glass window, I saw him struggling in the locked chair. He kicked hard at the floor, as if trying to stand up, but his hands were still cuffed. Why is it counting down? Please, help me. Do something. We heard him yell. That was his last sentence. A massive explosion sounded, and we all ducked and covered our heads. I was stunned by what had just happened. A few minutes later, I heard the police radioing each other. The robber had passed away. Everything that followed, I only learned through the investigation report and the news. His name was Joey Garcia, 46, a Taco Bell delivery driver. He initially told the police he was forced to do this. He claimed someone had strapped the bomb to him and ordered him to rob the bank. Joey recounted that while on a delivery route, a customer lured him into a house, tied his hands, secured the bomb around his neck, and forced him to commit the robbery. He called it a sick game. But I remembered when he stood in front of me, handing over the note with a calm face, then casually taking a lollipop. He didn't look scared at all, not like someone being forced. While waiting for the bomb squad, the police noticed his relaxed attitude. With a casual air, he even told a guarding officer in an amused tone, "Don't worry, it won't go off. I'm not that easy to kill." But then, the device started to beep after a few minutes, slowly at first, then distinctly faster. Joey froze for a few seconds. His eyes were wide open. Then he began to panic. Why is it beeping? I didn't set a timer. This isn't real. It's not real. The police looked at each other for exactly 1 second. They didn't need to ask anything more. Immediately, according to protocol, everyone quickly withdrew, leaving Joey sitting alone. Joey began to scream. Why is it counting down? Do something, please. Save me. He struggled futilely. At exactly 3:18 p.m., the bomb exploded. The explosion wasn't very loud, nor powerful enough to damage anything nearby, even at close range, but it was sufficient to create a deep hole right in Joey's chest. He died instantly. He died by the very bomb he was carrying, something no one expected. But the truth about the bomb and the bank robbery was even more shocking. Joey Garcia had lied. No one forced him. It was all planned and executed by him alone. He went onto the dark web, bought the components and casing for the device. The transaction was made with his last borrowed money. The package was advertised as a fake bomb, but extremely realistic. Except, it turned out to be a real bomb. The control circuit was pre-rigged with a small amount of explosive, enough to kill one person. Perhaps he didn't even know that. He thought he was playing a game, pretending to be a victim, and would run away with the money. But it all ended that afternoon. The investigation determined that Joey was a heavy drug user, addicted to gambling and drowning in debt. In 1 year, he had been fired from 3 different jobs. The robbery that day wasn't a spontaneous act. It was the culmination of months of being out of control, coupled with a decision so wrong there was no turning back. After going through the incident, people often ask me if I was scared. At first, I felt disgust, then anger, and now, it's an unnamed void. A person walking into a bank with a bomb is something I had only seen in movies. But that time, I wasn't just watching. I witnessed it all. And since that day, whenever I stand near an ATM and hear that beep, I shiver.
Thank you for watching until the end. As mentioned earlier, our goal of reaching 50,000 subscribers in 2026 is still ongoing. If you enjoy these stories, please give us a hand and